Muito boa tarde. Bem-vindos à quarta sessão plenária do Encontro Ciência 2021, intitulada A Ciência e os Novos Desafios da Interação Espaço-Clima, da observação da Terra ao clima espacial. Vamos iniciar com uma intervenção por Marta Oliveira, especialista em segurança de lançadores no Porto Espacial Europeu em Kourou e também comissária do Ciência 2021.
Bem-vindos. Vamos iniciar a sessão em inglês para facilitar o seguimento da abertura por todos os intervenientes convidados. Good afternoon. Welcome to the fourth plenary session of Ciência 2021. We are extremely pleased to have the opportunity to discuss with our distinguished speakers the topic of science and the new challenges of space-climate interaction, from Earth observation to space climate. On this panel, we'll get to explore several perspectives on this subject, starting with a look from our planet. With all we hear from tech giants with grand plans for Mars colonies to moon landers, our future in space can appear far off. In this discussion, we will bring it much closer to home. We will talk about the great challenges we face, for instance, regarding spatial planning using satellite technology, but also our need to improve our knowledge in ocean and climate dynamics. Today, Earth observation satellites are a vital tool for monitoring rising sea levels, deforestation, or man-made emissions. This technology has given us unprecedented scientific insight to better understand the effects of climate change on our surroundings and continues to be essential for operational and research meteorology and disaster monitoring. Europe has been a pioneer in this area, and to highlight its excellence, we must mention the European Union's Copernicus program, the largest environmental monitoring program in the world, and the Sentinel missions derived, of course. This program is a key example of how we are improving our understanding of the effects of climate change, but also the way we manage the environment and protect our planet. The European Space Agency has also been instrumental in setting up initiatives that optimize the use of Europe's Earth observation assets to generate long-term data sets needed for more and better science. It is clear that spaceborne sensing of the Earth's surface and atmosphere will continue to play an increasingly important role. As we will start moving away from Earth in this session, we will still be looking back at our planet from outer space and reflecting on the overview effect, this shift in awareness that is described by so many astronauts after experiencing spaceflight. This concept remains for sure an old favorite because it reminds us, in a way, of all that is most precious to us about our presence in space and our planet. At the beginning of the space age, space weather was not necessarily considered a heightened concern for exploration, but it is increasingly a subject of interest, both in terms of terrestrial effects and space exploration. As we know, Earth's magnetic field protects us from charged particles ejected when the surface of the sun erupts with gas and plasma, but the particles can still damage electronics, power grids, and critical satellites. The International Space Station, for instance, has increased shielding around crew quarters, and astronauts' radiation exposure is thoroughly monitored. So when we start projecting onto the future, especially when thinking of manned missions, these effects cannot be ignored. With no further ado, and before we dive right into the core of our session, we will hear from the Executive Director of the EU Agency for the Space Program. Thank you so much for your presence and for your interest. Have a great session. Obrigada a todos.
Segunda intervenção, vamos ouvir uma mensagem de Rodrigo da Costa, diretor executivo da Agência para o Programa Espacial da União Europeia.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak here today at the Ciência 2021 event. Today I will talk about science and the new challenges of space-climate interaction, from Earth observation to space climate. But let me start by introducing myself. My name is Rodrigo da Costa. I'm the Executive Director of the European Union Agency for the Space Program. Through the EU Space Regulation, the European Union Agency for the Space Program gets tasks mainly in three areas, our three key pillars. First, the exploitation, the service provision, and the operation of Europe's satellite navigation systems, EGNOS and Galileo. In this area, we have increased responsibilities vis-à-vis our predecessor agency, the GSA. Second, in the area of security. We are now responsible for the security accreditation of all components of the space program. We are responsible as well for the operational security of Galileo and EGNOS, and for the operations of the Galileo Security Monitoring Center. And last but not the least, all the activities on market uptake, innovation and entrepreneurship for Galileo and EGNOS, but also for the commercial utilization of Copernicus and GovSatcom. And these are particularly important for the activities we are discussing today, because all our activities in terms of the market uptake of the space program will be directed towards the priorities of the European Union, and in particular, the achievement and the implementation of the Green Deal. On the 12th of May of this year, the new EU space regulation was published. The new space regulation brings together all the elements and all the activities of the European Union in space under one single umbrella. With this regulation, space data is now at the heart of a technology revolution. The European Union has been active in space since a long time. Programs such as Copernicus for Earth observation or Galileo and EGNOS for navigation are already there since a long time. Nevertheless, now, with the new space regulation, they are not anymore individual programs, but they are all together part of the ambition of the European Union in space. In addition to Copernicus, Galileo and EGNOS, the space regulation includes as well other programs to come, such as GovSatcom for secured satellite communication for governmental actors, and others such as space traffic management. By integrating the programs together, new opportunities appear. They appear for our economy to improve our safety and our security as well. With the creation and the establishment of the EU Space Program, also our agency was established, the EU Space Program Agency. This agency, it's a user-oriented operational agency for the EU Space Program, and we want to contribute to the sustainable growth and to the security and safety of the European Union. Our history is long, since we are inheriting all the legacy from our predecessor, the European GNSS Agency. But now we have as well new tasks, and we are not only focused on navigation, but also on both the market uptake and the security of all elements of the space program. Now let me talk to you for a moment of how the space program helps us manage our key environmental and climate changes. Space is everywhere, this we know, but as well, space has a key contribution to reducing our environmental footprint, for example, by reducing the usage of pesticides in agriculture, for improving the urban planning, for helping us better manage our forests, to be quicker, of course, in case of natural disasters, planning renewable energy, monitoring the air quality of our cities, and of course monitoring as well our atmosphere. Also, navigation has a key role and a key contribution to the reduction of our footprint, because navigation helps us move in a more sustainable way. I have here a couple of examples. We have 80,000 flight delays and about 20,000 diversions are avoided in Europe because we use satellite navigation. This means about 15 million tons of CO2 that are saved and 3.5 billion liters of fuel. Navigation, space-based navigation, helps us also to become greener. with a sincere and a strong reduction in the utilization of pesticides and fertilizers, but also with a better utilization of resources, such as water management. And it helps us as well to strengthen our economy, with several hours or many hours of work saved for Europe's consumers and professionals, and as well a large amount of jobs that are supported in the downstream industry, but also beyond that at user level. Also, Copernicus provides unique data and information that is key for climate management. The Copernicus services that are provided free and openly to all users around the world cover a vast range of applications and areas. Atmosphere monitoring, the maritime service, land monitoring, climate change, security, emergency management, just to cite a few. Now, by bringing all of those together, that helps us to preserve the environment and to strengthen our economy. By reducing consumption of fuel, of water, reducing our emissions, and at the same time, increase efficiency, sustainability, and production in many areas, such as resource management, agriculture, etc. Now, EU Space supports many of the EU priorities. It naturally supports the transition to the digital age, supports as well a more resilient EU economy, and the safety and security of our citizens. But today and in this conference, I want to highlight how space helps us to attain the targets of the Green Deal. For example, sustainable mobility enabled by space-based data and services. And that means smarter and safer transport in land, maritime, and in air. A better usage of pesticides, reducing pollution as well. And support to the management of resources, enabling the so-called circular economy with a better water management, better land use, and more efficient utilization of raw materials. So as you can see, space is key and crucial for the Green Deal. From my point of view, it will be one of the enablers to attain the Green Deal objectives. We are doing this concretely at EUSPA. In EUSPA, we are fostering innovation that targets the achievement of the Green Deal targets. For example, with Horizon Europe. And we have, and we will have soon, a number of calls open that I hope will be interesting for all the innovators, entrepreneurs, scientists and engineers that want to contribute to the Green Deal achievement through the use of space data. Here are a couple of examples. For example, a zero pollution ambition in a toxic-free environment, the provision of clean, affordable and secure energy, accelerating the shift to sustainable and smart mobility, building and renovating in an energy and resource efficient way, and of course also very important, the strategy of farm to fork, making sure that we have a fair, healthy and environmentally friendly food system. All of these activities and all of these areas will be supported by our actions in Horizon. And again, I hope that this will be attractive to scientists and engineers, entrepreneurs and innovators to come with ideas to contribute to this. With this, I close this brief presentation. I hope that I have achieved the objective to introduce the sessions that will come afterwards, because space, and in particular EU space, plays and will play a crucial role in the management of the climate changes we have ahead of us. Thank you very much, and I wish you a rest of a good conference.
Segue-se um debate que será moderado por Ricardo Conde, presidente da Agência Espacial Portuguesa, que já se encontra em palco. O debate inclui também um painel com os seguintes especialistas: Jean-Jacques Favier, astronauta francês, que participa por videoconferência; Zita Martins, astrobióloga, investigadora e professora no Instituto Superior Técnico de Lisboa; João Pinelo e Pedro Silva, investigadores do Laboratório de Observação da Terra e do Centro Internacional de Investigação do Atlântico, o Air Center, instalado e a operar na Ilha Terceira, nos Açores; e Tiago Oliveira, presidente da Agência para a Gestão Integrada de Fogos Rurais. Passo a palavra então ao presidente da Agência Espacial Portuguesa, Ricardo Conde.
Muito obrigado, boa tarde a todos. Bonjour, Jean-Jacques. Bienvenue. I will switch later in English. Now I need to say thank you to Rodrigo for this nice video. Tiago, I'm just see your daughter. She's pay attention to the video, so we need to use this video more often. So, thank you, Rodrigo, to share with us this nice challenge that we have in front of us, which is the challenge for a European Space Program, and also yourself driving the new agency to implement this challenge in Europe, EOSPA. So welcome to these last sections of the second day. And I'm sure it was a long day, and we need to close this with in the light mode, with this dialogue that we will have here for the next hour. I think we will be really motivated with to share some of views about the interactions of climate, space, of course, using Earth observation technologies, and also to benefits of the experience of an astronaut. I want to give you like a script of how we will do it this today, and we'll start with a short journey starting from the land. In particular, I will start with Tiago, because Tiago is a very experienced person in the management of the territory, and particularly when we are facing these impacts of fires. And then I will jump to the sea, from the land to the sea, to Pedro and also to João, to understand better also the interactions between oceans and atmosphere, and of course the technologies that we have and we can use to better understand these interactions. Then I will move from the oceans to space, and I will jump to Zita and also to Jean-Jacques to try to understand the different point of view of dimensions of space, and particularly how humans survive in the space explorations challenge that we have in front of us. But more than this, particularly what are, for example, this subject that sometimes we are not deeply talk about that, which is the space weather, and what kind of implications that we have and when addressing these dimensions of some of the aspects of the space exploration. And I think our guests are already presented by the introduction, and I will start with you, Tiago. So just to give you an overview what we will have here, we have a dialogue, but João and Pedro and Zita, I think you have a short presentation that we want to share with us, some slides and also some information. But I will start with Tiago, particularly Tiago. You are, let's say, responsible to manage an agency to try to tackle the problems of the fires. And I want to hear from you how you see to use new technologies to help your mission. This is one, we need to focus this in our topic of today, but then I also want to hear from you what are the climate change impact in this new challenge that you have in front, and how can you relate this with also to use new space technologies, for example, or land technologies?
Thank you for the invitation, Ricardo, and all other people that are with us, and also to the astronauts. It's the first time that I'm face-to-face with astronauts. Thanks for this opportunity. Well,
you have a chance to ask him some questions. Huh?
Yes. No, I think, well, the role of the agency is to foster better policies and also to integrate the incentives of different type of policies: environmental, energy, forestry, conservation, and landscapes planning. Several policies that shape or frame the fire issue problem. And our role is also to monitoring the National Rural Fire Program, which is several projects that has already been approved 2 months ago, in order to put the critical tasks in different ministries and agencies in place to have all the necessary actions in the ground to happen in order to change land use and land cover, and also to prepare the country for very severe fire events. This is a huge challenge. It's a societal issue, and it's very demanding. But our main concern regarding the use of remote sensing and observation tools is to bring down to the politician and policymakers main arena the critical issues of the scale. For those that are used to fly on helicopters, airplane, and also for those that are out there, I think when they observe the Earth, they see the problem in different scales. And for those that observe the fires in Portugal and the smoke plumes and all these details, and then when they go zoom in, and they can zoom to the plot size, but they can understand that it's a landscape issue. And
so it's a different reality, indeed.
It's a different reality, but I think the remote sensing monitoring capabilities and the time series and land use, land cover capabilities in order to monitoring the surface of the land, the forest, for example, and also to do it in a quantitative approach, brings down the fuel models, the fuel types, the fuel amount that is available to burn. But we need to understand, and this is really a quite important evidence for those that are doing the public policies, is that it's a landscape issue. You cannot act by yourself, you need to act collectively, because it's a social, economical, and ecological problem, which brings down, for example, a recent information that we collected from the research unit in Portugal that summarized the burned areas since 1975 around Portugal, that 12% of the problem represents 40% of the burned area. So we have 40% of the burned area occurring in 12% of the Portugal, mostly on pastures and rangelands, which brings the issue of agriculture policy, because it's fires driven by perverse or of unintended money subsidies that goes for...
And also land registry.
Yep. So there are a lot of capabilities concerning monitoring and also concerning the support of public policies that foster the discussion of the problem beyond the daily life on solving the consequence of the problem. Mm-hmm. And that's quite useful.
And let me ask you another question, because this is important according to the landscape that we have in our companies. You know that we, in Portugal, we starting some months ago to have these capabilities, to high-resolution satellites, to give a new perspective to monitoring the land and also to manage the territory. You think this is a valid tool that should be used, for example, to monitoring? I'm not fighting, because this is another level of the problem, but monitoring the fuel that we have in the forests, monitoring the dynamic monitoring of the territory, and you think this could be really tool that could be available to the institutions that you are coordinating?
Yes, from the scientific perspective, the information that is being gathered since the 70s is fully available, and the methodologies have proven that they are available and they are useful. I think the challenge now, what we face ahead is, for example, the National Guard. They need to have available products in order for data and that knowledge that has been driven from the remote sensing tools need to be applied at operational level to bring down the effectiveness of the resources they have and to promote the fast daily or monthly monitoring of the status of the vegetation. And it's quite useful. I think we are just there, not yet, but it's about fostering and improving the capabilities in the public institutions, which brings the need for training, the need for some flexibility in contracting the services, and there is a lot of things that are ready, available, and being used. But the challenge ahead are about extracting the knowledge, not only for the fancy of emergency response, but beyond that. I think we need to use these capabilities to harness the public discussion and development of public policies from the side of the causes of the problem, which brings the distribution of value, the implementation of fair trade or better regulations and better risk governance of the problem, which are quite important. For example, in Finland, we do know, and this is public available, that all this information being gathered by remote sensing, it's public, and every person knows how much wood they have under their own management, under their boundaries. And that information is public, and the bid, it's mainly driven by internet. In Portugal, we have the middleman, several obscure systems, not transparent regulation. And what we need in Portugal, because mostly of the land is privately owned, is to have these tools collecting data being transformed in knowledge, and then knowledge being public facilitated in order to have tools that allows a better management of the resources, but also better regulation and better, I would say, financial tools in order to solve the small parcel plots that each Portuguese owns, but is managing by himself instead of having a collective action. And as the problem face landscape level and express at this level, we need to promote a fast way to have information being shared and data being facilitated to the public audience in order to promote this common ground of knowledge, to promote the common good on managing those resources, instead of this egoistic perspective of everyone taking care of his own, regardless of the common consequences. And this scale of the satellites, I think, bring down this evidence on managing the resources by a common good.
And also some diversifications of data, not only for satellites, but in situ, and some kind of diversifications. I heard once that if we will be possible one day to have in our hands a device like a mobile phone that we can ask, what is the health of the planet today? That will be amazing, because we are, at the end of the day, we are concentrating in some databases and some information that we need to tackle this kind of problems. I will now pass, I will back to you later, Tiago. I have some questions also for you, but I will now jump to the ocean. We have here today Pedro and João, Pedro Freire and João Pinelo from the Air Center. I think you will explain what is the Air Center, International Research Organization for the Atlantic. You have a short presentation that we will enlighten us about some lighthouse projects that you have. And of course, there are something that we are anxious to hear is the links, the ties between these interactions between oceans and also climate change and the atmosphere, all these interactions and the knowledge that you are producing in Air Center. So you need now, I can ask for the presentation. Right?
Thank you, Ricardo. I'm going to...
You can do it here because you have the pointer here. You can
Excellent.
Do it, if you are more comfortable, you can do it here.
Even better. So thanks very much for the invitation and to be here and to have this opportunity to show you also and everybody what we are doing here in the Air Center. I don't know if we have the presentation.
Can I ask to pass the presentation of Air Center, please?
So, very briefly, I would like to bring to your attention that a little bit about what the Air Center is doing in terms of the international cooperation, and then go towards the Atlantic challenges that we are facing, as the Air Center is in an international Atlantic organization, and how space and Earth observation can bring benefits indeed for our daily lives. I'll give some practical examples. João, as a senior project officer and data scientist in the Air Center, will give precise examples of activities that are ongoing and that are ongoing at the moment, which are bringing a lot of effort and energy from the Air Center. So international cooperation is a stepping stone, a cornerstone, and the Air Center is more than ever as an organization which is doing a very big effort in bringing different partners around the Atlantic. Now more than ever, we need this international cooperation. We are living an existential climate threat. Our planet is burning. We just saw in the news a couple of days ago that in Canada we have reached the record high temperatures, 46.6 degrees, close to Vancouver. Of course, this implies that we will have trees, forests, and life. At the moment, we have something like 1 million species in near-term danger of extinction. So, rising temperatures, biodiversity, and then at the same time, technological advances. They are driving faster and faster at an even faster pace. Machine learning, artificial intelligence, digital world, all these things are happening at an even faster pace. I just would like to see if I could show this video, but it's not working. But anyway, the Air Center, as an international distributed and collaborative network, is fostering job creation in a knowledge-driven economy in the Atlantic region. It is based on scientific excellence and providing services to the scientific community. And we are contributing to monitoring and contribute to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals on topics such as climate change and the digital transformation. We are headquartered in Terceira, in the Azores, in the middle of the Atlantic. We have many countries which have been joining the Air Center since its creation. We go from Norway to South Africa, Brazil, recently the US. We have a major high-level dialogue event in Penn State. So the network continues to grow, and it has been a success with a number of partners and initiatives that have been going on. So the Air Center started back in 2018, and even before with the high-level dialogues. The last one was, as I said, in October 2020 in Penn State. And as a result of all these high-level dialogues, which included scientists, researchers, politicians, policymakers, we came to a series of thematic missions. And these thematic missions are the core, or are at the center of what we are aiming to do at the Air Center. So in this slide and in this image, you can see the main missions. They go from clean and productive bays and estuaries to sustainable food production, to improve the management of marine and coastal resources, and environment and maritime monitoring. So to give you an example of of what are these main challenges. So in the clean and productive bays and estuaries, we know that these areas are very severely impacted by anthropogenic impacts. They are suffering from pollution, physical changes, loss of habitats, and of course environmental changes as well. We are seeing sea level rise in many locations, water temperature increase, acidification, coastal erosion, and all these threats are today already happening. So as an example of activities that the Earth Center has been very involved in doing is the ports of the future, for example. We are helping using Earth observation data to monitor the quality and reduce the impact of environmental impact of ports, keeping them neutral and less pollutant. Another example is plastics. Plastics is a major concern as well. We have just started a project where we are looking at the problem of plastics in very detail, from the nanoscale to the macro scale from Earth observation and satellite. And we have also been observing the impact, for instance, of the COVID here in Portugal, looking at the quality of the water in the turbidity, and we've seen that during the first outbreak of the COVID, there was a very high reduction of the turbidity of the water close to the Tagus River. So another example, resilience to coastal and natural hazards. This is something that is increasing more and more. We are having more scenarios in which storms and floods are affecting daily lives of people. And there are already companies in Portugal which are developing solutions using radar, Sentinel-1 satellite, which can see through the clouds. Soil risk is an example of that. So it mixes different sources of information from soil moisture, radar, and combines and provides information which can then be used to act. Sustainable food production, it's a major concern as well. The population is growing, the food supply needs to grow as well in a sustainable way. Fisheries, aquaculture, precision agriculture, all these solutions are complex, intertwined, and they involve social, economic, and many, many different aspects which need to be tackled. And an example of that is also a recent project which has been started, an international one, where we have starting to use the Earth observation data to detect harmful algal blooms. They are very important because they can decimate populations, entire stocks of fish in an aquaculture farm, and this is a major issue, of course. And then, of course, another example of a project which is ongoing, which is the early warning system of a specific fungus that affects the dairy cattle. This is an example that the Earth Center has been leading and has implemented a prototype that allows already today, by monitoring temperature, humidity, and using also Earth observation from space, to inform the farmers in day-to-day decisions that they need to make to manage their farms. And this is an operational system which is working right now, and we want to expand it. It's right now running in the Azores, but there are other locations that we could also envisage this to work. And finally here, and I will not go through all the entire missions, but a very important one, which is to have an improved management of marine and coastal resources. This is a major paradigm shift must happen, because life on the oceans and its integrity must be maintained, and for future generations to come. And it's really important to monitor and to understand what's happening in biodiversity, as with ocean acidification is happening, and temperature of the oceans is changing as well. And all these things can be observed by space, using space Earth observation. So this is what it is so-called essential biodiversity variables. And linking these variables to remote sensing is key to understand what's happening and to improve the understanding of biodiversity from local to global scales. And the Earth Center is an active member of the MBON, the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network. We are hosting the Secretariat, and we are contributing to this observation network. I'll ask João just to provide us an insight of the two examples of projects and going in a little bit more into detail. João?
I'm João Pinelo, data scientist at the Air Center. It's a pleasure to be here. So LabPlus is a project that started this month.
You should talk close to the microphone.
This project started only this month in June. Has a duration of 4 years. It's funded, it's a GATT 2020 project funded by the EU. And this is a perfect example of international collaboration with 16 different partners in 8 countries. The objective of the project is to find a way through Earth observation to detect microplastics and then allow us to understand better the problem and influence, diminish their impact. Then the other practical example that is a prototype that is already implemented, and it's been running for 6 months now with results already. It helps the farmers in the Azores who have dairy cattle to protect the cattle. So there is a fungus that sporulates during certain conditions, environmental conditions, and we created this prototype that gathers data, monitors data, analyzes it, and then maps, quantifies the risk in a geo-referenced way. So the farmer can use mitigation measures when necessary and only when necessary, which was not the common practice. At the same time, there is a validation system in place with the National Laboratory of Veterinary who validates basically our data, the level of risk. During this first year, we're also advancing the scientific knowledge to better understand the phenomena. I was planning to show you the application because it is running online, but we can't unfortunately, but it is and it's used by farmers on a daily basis, although it's still a prototype. Then I mentioned a project that is the first one, LabPlus, is scientific. This last one, it bridges to the end user. And this is a very different type of project. We are the Air Center, one of the engines behind a new constellation that will create more data, more detailed data with more frequency to complement the data from the Copernicus program. It will be 18 CubeSats, but this whole program is still being defined, being developed. We have over 20 projects running at the moment. This is just a diagram that shows some of them, mapping them. In some cases, we have the observation, we're responsible or contribute to observation segments, sometimes to the control or data segments, and they are always aligned with our missions. So just to close, the Earth observation enables addressing major challenges. We have more than 20 ongoing projects across different Air Center missions. More than 20 countries actively collaborating with us, 9 countries actively engaged in the definition of this Atlantic constellation I just mentioned. And Earth observation also provides transnational, this is a critical aspect, transnational data addressing international challenges, because all these challenges, these major challenges, they have no borders, offering new opportunities for science and companies. These are another 2 keywords here, science and companies, working together. And then, of course, this is a continuous effort for the short term, but also for the long term. And this is a commitment that it's important that we do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, João. I have a question for you both. João, for example, you are a data scientist, and one of your tools is artificial intelligence. This is nowadays a keyword. And I want to ask you about the data. So what is really needed? We need more data, more frequent data, more quality data, or we should remove the barriers of the existing data to have more access to this data. And also, another perspective of the question, the data is already there, but we cannot extract yet the information to produce some, let's say, policies and some knowledge and implement the policies?
Well, I'll say we need everything. We need to put effort into all those fronts. And the needs really vary with the field, vary with times, vary with the trends. For example, now there is a paradigm shift where we normally had a lot of data, then we created models, and those models create knowledge or information. We're coming to a point where sometimes the models are more fixed, and we change the output by changing the input data. And so we need, the short answer is we need, yes, always.
And this is also one of the reasons that you are also promoting and implementing these new sources of data like satellite constellations and also in situ new additional data, right?
Yes, certainly. We are installing a direct receiving station there in Terceira, in our headquarters in the Azores. And this constellation will also, the new constellation will also bring more data to help cover all the Atlantic and more, but in a more consistent, more detailed way.
At the end, you are looking the same that Tiago, because they Tiago for the land, and you for the ocean. They need more data to interact and to produce knowledge and of course to implement the policies. Now I jump to from the ocean to space, and let's look at the space with the different perspectives. And for that, I have here Zita and also Jean-Jacques. There are several dimensions of this discussion that we can address. For example, the new markets in the what so-called LEO economy. This is a new perspective to doing business, but there are also the perspectives of the space exploration. And for space exploration, we naked the humankind, how fragile we are, and the challenge of space radiations, and some challenge that we have. There are some agencies, they are prepared to mining, to colonies in the moon, try to use the moon to jump to the travels to Mars. But for that, we need technology, we need knowledge, and we need to know ourselves better. Zita, you have a short presentation, I think. And then after your presentation, I will have some questions for you.
Okay, good. I think, first of all, I mean, we've been all dreaming about space since we were young students. And so I think this discussion is also important to bring the science of space and show how important it is and how we use it on day-to-day lives. I mean, we've been having decades of space missions where we had lots of spin-offs, and the spin-offs were actually objects that we use on daily basis, and we all mention all the time the cameras on our mobile phones, etc. So there are several examples. I would like just to focus first on space and how space can help us on addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. Obviously, I could give a full talk, and we could be here talking about each one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I'm not going to do this today, but I'd like to focus on these five goals, especially because they do the bridge between what I'm talking and what the previous speakers mentioned. So goal number 2, zero hunger. Number 3, good health and well-being. Number 4, quality education. Sustainable cities, and then climate action. And I'm going to very briefly talk on each one of them. So we've seen here today how important satellite constellations and planning for those satellite constellations are, especially for agriculture, because basically satellite image can monitor how crops grow, when the agriculture, they could say, okay, now is the time to provide water, now is the time to cut and everything. So very important for the farmers. In terms of Sustainable Development Goal, and we have here today in this session an astronaut. He knows much better than I do about the medical monitoring of astronauts, and in particular on the International Space Station, they have this medical monitoring. And so basically it's data that is collected before, during, and after. And this is an amazing tool. This is very good because this allows not only to help astronauts and control their health, but also to develop new tools for biological and immunological testing in space. Why is this important? Well, think about an astronaut that stays, for example, on the International Space Station for several months. If they're sick, we can't just simply go to the International Space Station and give them a medicine or whatever. So we can apply that to remote areas or poor areas in our planet. So applying these tools is very, very important. So when we have projects on the International Space Station, we're not only thinking about those projects, like I have 2 projects right now with the European Space Agency, but I'm always thinking about the implications here to the Earth. So number 4, quality education. We've seen how with the pandemic, education is so important. So again, going back to the satellite internet, SpaceLink, and how important it is to have a constellation of satellites that they provide internet, especially in areas that are, the internet is not easily accessed. And again, we've seen how that is very important in the past year and how that is very important for educators and students. Number 11, obviously we need to have quality in the cities and the communities we live. So we need to definitely monitor the air quality and the environment. And so the satellites, again, and several space missions measure trace gases, and here comes the chemistry and how important chemistry it is, and we can control the quality of the Earth's atmosphere. Nearly closing the end, so climate action, because this session is actually between the link between space and climate. The satellites, again, can help us to monitor climate change, and they have a very special role, not only in monitoring, but after there is something that happens, like a disaster, the satellites are very good to help us manage and to prevent and to give an early warning, but after, if a disaster occurs, how we give a response and how quickly we reconstruct. So those are ways in how space can address all those Sustainable Development Goals, but I would like to very quickly give you examples, practical examples. It was here on the previous talk mentioned, from Air Center, obviously, AEROS constellation. We had also on the previous session here on Ciência, we talked a lot about AEROS. This is an MIT Portugal project, and this is obviously about development of a nanosatellite platform, and it links space with the oceans and all the economic synergies that it brings. And you can see all those universities, research centers, international corporations, they're working together. Another one of those projects, MIT Portugal projects, in this case, NewSat, development of a compact sensor and satellite for Earth observation, in this case, application to global warming and how this affects the atmosphere. Another one, Key2D, this is to create a foundation to implement and to monitor the oceans, because obviously we need the oceans to be healthy. And I would like just to bring your attention to this challenge. That is, there was a PT space competition also regarding ESA and Mbabo Labs and ANI, and this was presented, and the winners were told and presented at the Web Summit. This was a global competition. It was not just national, it was a global competition. And this was to monitor the plastics and the litter that exists on planetary scale, but in particular on the oceans. So the main problem is that there is lots of trash in the oceans, and how could we address this? Using artificial intelligence and the use of space, so satellite data. And we have to say that we put together, and in this case I participate in this project, we put together this project, PT Smart, several teams, and you can see all the affiliations there, and we put together a team with the title Distributing IA System for Marine Plastic Debris Monitoring, PT Smart, and we were the winner of this presentation, and we were very happy. So, last example I'm going to give you is this platform that the link is here, so I'll suggest all of you to go there. It's Earth DNA, and it's for all ages. It's a platform for climate advocacy and action. So you may ask questions or you may search in this, this platform, and he actually tries to explain how it is all connected, how Earth and climate and also space is all connected, and how actually we could do something, all of us, and gives you all lots of advice. Just to finish, I finish with the same slide that I started, and that's for a particular reason. It's just to show that the Earth is not isolated. We are in space, we are in the solar system, in the universe, but the problems that affect us all here on Earth affect us all. And it is important that the research we do in space, in several space missions. So when we do a space mission, for example, and recently it's been advertised going to Venus again, returning to Venus. And people said, why are we going again back to Venus and spending money? Well, Venus, some people say that Venus also had an atmosphere like we had here now on the Earth. And so by understanding the mechanisms of Venus on the past and studying and having a space mission there, we also understand our planet and what may happen in our planet if we don't take care of our climate and everything. So when we have space missions, we have to understand that scientists are not just very happy because they had the space mission to a planet, to a moon, etc., but we're always thinking about the spin-offs and the applications for the quality of life here on Earth. So, thank you.
Thank you, Zita, for this inspiring presentation. It was really also nice to see one challenge that we put, like the moonshot, and this brings my attention to one problem that we still have. We don't have data enough to get some real and some strong conclusions. This is a gap that we need to fulfill. And I have also a question for you, Zita, and this is related with the space weather. Because I am quite sure that Jean-Jacques will address this, because this is another point of view of our planet, but we can come this later. Jean-Jacques, it's your turn now. So we need to understand the point of view of an astronaut. I can tell you, Jean-Jacques, that we have a person here doesn't ever see an astronaut. It's Tiago. So Tiago, you are in front of you an astronaut. You can ask him about his perception of our planet. So Jean-Jacques, of course we are anxious here to hear from you about your experience. Jean-Jacques flew in the Columbus in the 96, I'm right? 96?
Yeah, correct, yeah.
I think you will speak in French, right? According to the Marta told me that it's up to you, you can do it, huh? But we are here anxious to hear your point of view about all the points that we discussed here, and also the perspectives of someone that saw the planet far, far away from the Earth and saw some auroras, some space weather initiatives. Can you share the experience with us?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. I can speak English or French, it's up to you. Just tell me. D'abord, je voudrais vous remercier pour cette invitation. Donc, je suis très honoré de faire partie de cette conférence, les rencontres scientifiques et technologiques du Portugal, qui a lieu régulièrement. J'avais déjà assisté à une de ces conférences il y a quelques années. Et en fait, j'ai été très agréablement surpris d'abord d'apprendre que la France était le pays invité cette année. Donc, c'est peut-être aussi une des raisons qui vous a poussé à penser à mon profil. Je voudrais remercier en l'occurrence donc la commissaire Marta Oliveira, que je connais bien, puisque elle fut mon étudiante à l'International Space University à Strasbourg il y a quelques années, une de mes plus brillantes élèves d'ailleurs. Et donc, je suis très heureux de pouvoir la retrouver là ce soir. J'ai qu'un regret, c'est de ne pas être à Lisbonne avec vous. J'aime beaucoup votre ville et j'aurais bien aimé pouvoir assister donc en réel à cette conférence. Mais peut-être que ce sera pour la prochaine fois. Alors, vous me posez un certain nombre de questions sur, je dirais, mon profil d'astronaute et ce que les astronautes peuvent apporter à la problématique du jour, c'est-à-dire la question climatique pour notre planète, mais plus généralement aussi du système solaire et des autres planètes. On abordera ça lorsque l'on parlera d'exploration habitée. Donc, je voudrais, si vous me le permettez, parler ou diviser mon intervention en deux parties. D'une part, parler du rôle de l'astronaute et ce que l'astronaute peut apporter à nos amis et nos concitoyens quand on a la chance en fait de participer à une mission spatiale. Et puis effectivement, au titre des perspectives, voir quelles sont les autres problématiques liées au climat ou à la météo spatiale qui sont importantes pour notre vie sur Terre et aussi dans le reste du système solaire, spécialement si l'on veut aller explorer ou retourner sur la Lune, puis explorer Mars avec des astronautes. Alors, le rôle de l'astronaute, donc, qui a la chance de s'élever au-dessus de notre planète, pas bien haut, comme vous le savez, la station spatiale ou les navettes spatiales que moi j'ai pu utiliser, donc orbite à 400 km autour de la Terre, mais c'est une distance qui est vraiment très intéressante et très agréable, d'une part parce qu'elle permet déjà de voir globalement la planète avec ses continents, ses océans, dont il a été question déjà beaucoup dans vos exposés ce soir, et puis de l'atmosphère elle-même. On est juste au-dessus et on voit bien le couplage en fait entre ces trois parties de notre monde, océan, continent et atmosphère. Alors, l'image qui revient le plus souvent lorsque vous parlez à un astronaute, ou vous posez des questions à un astronaute, c'est quelle est la vue, qu'est-ce qui vous intéresse le plus, qu'est-ce qui vous a le plus marqué lorsque vous étiez dans l'espace? Et là, la réponse est toujours la même. La planète Terre, qui est réellement la planète bleue, est belle et fragile à la fois. Ça, c'est quelque chose que tout le monde ressent, qu'il soit expert, spécialiste, scientifique ou pas. Ça, c'est, je dirais, un ressenti humain qui est propre à l'astronaute qui a la chance de s'élever au-dessus de notre planète. Alors, vous le savez peut-être, je crois que Marta m'a introduit comme cela dans son exposé. Je ne suis pas un astronaute classique dans le sens où je ne suis pas pilote, je ne suis pas capable de piloter une navette ou une capsule spatiale, bien que j'ai été formé quand même pour cela, bien sûr beaucoup moins que mes collègues pilotes, mais en cas de problème, j'aurais pu être amené à faire atterrir la navette. J'étais en 5e position dans l'équipage pour m'en occuper, pour la petite histoire. Mais donc, ma formation et mes intérêts sont plus scientifiques. Je suis donc ingénieur et physicien. Et je dirais que c'est avec un œil de chercheur que je suis allé dans l'espace. D'une part, pour réaliser des expériences dans mon domaine d'expertise, c'est-à-dire la physique au sens large, les matériaux, la physique des fluides, croissance des protéines, biologie, biotechnologie, etc. Mais aussi pour, en fait, profiter d'un œil de scientifique, c'est-à-dire toujours un scientifique, un chercheur, toujours à la recherche de choses peu communes. Et c'est à ce titre-là que je vais vous parler un peu de ce que j'ai ressenti en regardant par le hublot. Alors, regarder par le hublot, c'était pas facile dans notre cas. Donc, j'ai volé, comme vous le savez, sur la navette Columbia. C'était la plus longue mission des flottes de navettes américaines avec 17 jours. bien sûr beaucoup moins longues comme mission que les missions de la Station spatiale aujourd'hui, qui font à peu près 6 mois, mais donc des missions très chargées, très lourdes, donc avec peu de temps disponible pour regarder par le hublot et admirer notre belle planète. Donc ce que je faisais en général, c'est que pendant les 8 heures de nuit ou de repos que l'on nous imposait, pendant lesquelles le centre de contrôle de Houston n'intervenait plus, eh bien, je passais la moitié de mon temps, au lieu de dormir, à regarder par le hublot. Effectivement, la vue est exceptionnelle. J'ai déjà parlé donc, de la beauté, de la fragilité qu'on ressent à tout moment. Ce que je voudrais aussi vous indiquer, et ça c'est l'œil un peu du scientifique, je veux dire, qui intervient, lorsqu'on regarde par le hublot, on a la possibilité en fait d'avoir une vue qui n'est pas simplement une vue à la verticale, comme c'est le cas pour toutes les prises de vue des satellites qui regardent à nadir en général, à la verticale. L'œil de l'astronaute peut en fait regarder beaucoup plus loin vers l'horizon et donc à l'horizontale, et à ce titre-là aussi découvrir un certain nombre de phénomènes qui pourront après être étudiés de façon plus systématique et plus quantitative par des missions spécifiques. Je vais vous donner un exemple. J'ai vu de mes propres yeux, et ça avait déjà été identifié par certains de mes collègues avant moi, les transferts en fait, de matière et de sable entre l'Afrique et l'Amazonie. On se pose souvent la question de savoir, avec toutes, je dirais, toutes les mètres-tonnes, les mètres cubes et les tonnes d'alluvions qui sont portées par le fleuve Amazonie, quelle est la recharge possible du continent sud-américain en termes de matière? Eh bien, ce qui a été identifié par les astronautes les premiers, et moi j'ai eu la chance de le voir, c'est en fait les jours de föhn, c'est-à-dire de grands vents au-dessus du Sahara, un nuage de sable, de matière donc, qui en fait traverse l'Atlantique Sud pour terminer en Amazonie. Et d'après les spécialistes, en fait, c'est une des manières dont, je dirais, le continent sud-américain, l'Amazonie en particulier, se recharge à partir de matières venant de l'Afrique. Donc, vous voyez, c'est cette vision horizontale qui n'est pas la vision classique du satellite qui permet, en fait, de faire des découvertes de ce type-là. Ce qui m'a frappé aussi beaucoup, bien sûr, ce sont les cyclones au-dessus de l'océan. Passer au-dessus d'un œil de cyclone, c'est quelque chose d'assez extraordinaire. On voit avec précision l'œil qui, en fait, est immobile et, en fait, la rotation en fait, des nuages autour de cet œil. En général, lorsque l'on faisait notre exercice de sport quotidien, eh bien, on essayait de se placer devant un hublot pour pouvoir voir en même temps donc la Terre. Et c'est dans ces conditions-là que j'ai découvert un cyclone énorme qui se formait au sud de l'Atlantique. Donc, j'avais une des plus belles salles de sport du monde lorsque j'étais dans la navette spatiale à regarder par le hublot. Ce que l'on voit aussi, et là je rebondis un peu sur ce qui a été indiqué par vos collègues spécialistes tout à l'heure, on a parlé beaucoup des incendies, des feux de forêt et de tout ce qu'il fallait mettre en œuvre pour essayer d'abord de les identifier et puis de les juguler. Moi, ce qui m'a frappé à ce titre-là, c'est donc les différents types d'incendies que l'on peut voir à l'œil nu depuis la navette. Sur tous les continents, il y a des incendies. Ça brûle. En Afrique, en Californie, que lorsque j'étais dans l'espace en juin-juillet, donc ça brûlait pas mal aussi. Mais en général, ce sont des foyers sporadiques, c'est-à-dire un endroit précis, puis plus loin, quelques centaines ou milliers de kilomètres. Par contre, en Amazonie, la déforestation d'Amazonie est très, très visible depuis l'espace et ne ressemble pas du tout à ces feux sporadiques que j'évoquais à l'instant. Ce sont des fronts entiers qui, sur des centaines de kilomètres, voire des milliers de kilomètres, progressent. Et ça, c'est quelque chose qui m'a beaucoup marqué. Et on peut dire, lorsqu'on en est en Europe, que bon, ces déforestations, c'est à l'autre bout du monde, ça ne nous concerne pas, mais vous savez, avec un véhicule spatial, la station ou la navette spatiale, il fallait moins de 10 minutes pour passer depuis l'Amazonie à l'Europe. Donc, on prend vraiment conscience de la dimension, je dirais, unitaire de cette petite planète dont il faut prendre le plus grand soin. Et de même pour la pollution, en fonction des vents, lorsque j'ai volé, il se trouvait qu'il y avait en fait une haute pression au-dessus de l'Europe et la pollution de la plaine du Pô en Italie passait au-dessus des Alpes pour retomber sur la France. Et ça, c'était aussi très, très visible. Et donc, des phénomènes dont il faut tenir compte pour, d'une part, essayer de les juguler, mais aussi pour quantifier leur effet sur la végétation ou autre. Donc, le rôle de l'astronaute dans l'espace, à mon avis, a deux missions essentielles. La première, encore une fois, c'est de communiquer sur ce qu'il voit, sur la beauté et la fragilité de son environnement. Il est clair, lorsqu'on a vu ça, et maintenant aujourd'hui, plus encore que lorsque j'ai volé il y a 25 ans, les réseaux sociaux permettent en fait de divulguer toutes ces images. À l'heure actuelle, nous avons un astronaute français, Thomas Pesquet, bien connu de certains, qui en fait s'est fait une spécialité de retransmettre quotidiennement des images, voire des vidéos de ce qu'il voit par la fenêtre. Donc ça, c'est quelque chose qui sensibilise donc les gens et à ce titre-là est très utile. Mais dans le même temps, ce que je peux vous dire, c'est que il n'y a pas de plan B pour la planète, parce que certains, et c'est ma transition vers l'exploration lointaine, certains, parmi d'ailleurs les gens qui font autorité ou qui sont très visibles dans les médias, comme par exemple Elon Musk, que j'admire d'ailleurs beaucoup par ailleurs, mais avec lequel je ne participe, je ne partage pas son point de vue de l'humanité qui est multiplanétaire, c'est-à-dire l'homme doit s'habituer à vivre non pas seulement pour visiter une autre planète, mais vivre définitivement sur notre planète au cas où notre planète ne serait plus en état de conduire au développement de notre humanité. Non, je crois que ça, ce n'est pas la bonne approche. Il faut pouvoir aller vers d'autres planètes pour les visiter, pour les explorer d'un point de vue scientifique, mais notre base à nous tous, c'est notre planète et c'est d'elle qu'il faut s'occuper pour être sûr que l'humanité pourra survivre. Donc, il n'en reste pas moins vrai qu'aller visiter d'autres planètes, en tant que scientifique en ce qui me concerne, est du plus haut intérêt. Et je crois qu'il y a un certain nombre de programmes qui, à l'heure actuelle, au niveau mondial, se mettent en place. Les Américains, par exemple, et leur retour sur la Lune avec le projet Artemis, mais qui ne sont pas les seuls. D'ailleurs, comme vous le savez certainement, les Chinois et les Russes se sont alliés pour eux aussi créer un programme d'exploration de la Lune, mais d'exploration cette fois-ci, non pas pour une simple visite comme pour les programmes Apollo, mais pour y rester. C'est-à-dire que ce sur quoi on travaille, et moi en tant que chercheur, avec mes étudiantes, que ce soit à l'ISU, que Martha a bien connu, ou à SUPAERO, ou à l'école des mines où je suis à l'heure actuelle, nous essayons de mettre en œuvre des technologies qui permettront en fait aux astronautes de vivre de longues périodes de longues missions, plusieurs mois, 6 mois, comme sur la station spatiale par exemple, sans avoir trop à compter sur le soutien de la Terre et des missions cargo, comme c'est le cas sur la station spatiale en ce moment, ou pour les missions Apollo dans le temps. Donc il faut essayer de trouver sur place un maximum de ressources pour être le plus autonome possible. C'est ce qu'on appelle les ISRU, In Situ Resource Utilization, qui doivent permettre aux astronautes de vivre pendant de longues périodes sur la Lune et plus tard sur Mars. La Lune préparant d'ailleurs les missions martiennes, qui, de mon point de vue, bon, sur la Lune, je pense que dans 5 ans, nous serons à nouveau sur la Lune, et cette fois-ci pour des missions mixtes, donc avec des astronautes des deux sexes, mais que sur Mars, nous n'y serons pas avant 35 ou 40 ans, compte tenu des difficultés et du coût de tels programmes. Alors, je terminerai par une chose qui a été évoquée tout à l'heure, c'est en fait les difficultés à surmonter pour pouvoir vivre sur ces planètes, en dehors de la Terre, et donc leur lien avec la météo de l'espace ou la space climate, qui est en fait l'environnement auquel on sera soumis lorsque l'on restera sur ces planètes pour longtemps, et qu'on a heureusement pas à subir trop, en tous les cas, sur notre planète Terre, à cause de 2 éléments majeurs qui sont la présence du champ magnétique, qui permet d'éloigner un certain nombre donc de particules chargées, et la présence de l'atmosphère aussi. Sur la Lune, il n'y a pas d'atmosphère, comme vous le savez, pas de champ magnétique non plus, donc on prend de plein fouet, en fait, les particules auxquelles on est soumis lorsqu'on est dans l'espace, qui sont d'une part donc le fond cosmique, donc le vent cosmique, qui est constant et arrose en fait tout le système solaire, et puis dans le voisinage du Soleil, donc les événements, les orages ou les événements donc particuliers solaires.
Jean-Jacques, est-ce que vous m'écoutez?
Oui, oui.
Il faut qu'on termine parce qu'on a 2 minutes seulement.
Donc, j'en termine là pour vous dire que, en fait, donc, la météo de l'espace est fondamentale, bien sûr, pour l'exploration, mais aussi pour la vie sur Terre, parce que lorsqu'il y a des orages solaires, eh bien, certaines particules, des protons en particulier, arrivent à passer notre atmosphère et peuvent mettre en danger un certain nombre de technologies que l'on utilise au sol. Et par exemple, le trafic aérien peut être aussi très perturbé par ces orages solaires. Donc, je reste là pour vous dire que bon, depuis l'espace, on voit énormément de choses. On peut aller plus loin, mais il faut tenir compte en fait de l'environnement très spécifique. Et les questions de météo là, sont au centre du débat. Merci encore de m'avoir écouté.
Merci bien Jean-Jacques, merci bien pour partager votre expérience comme un astronaute. Je retiens qu'est-ce que vous avez vu sur la planète, une planète sans frontières, une planète fragile et aussi qui est en transfert de la matière entre Afrique et l'Amazonie. Et aussi, vous avez vu le feu dans d'autres perspectives. Merci bien pour partager cette expérience. I will switch to English now. So we are just running out of the time, almost 7 o'clock. We are feeling the pressure of our ministers there, so we need to conclude. But let me just make the final remarks that in our dialogue, this light dialogue with the different perspectives and different experience, we address the perspective of the land, of the fires, someone that has responsible to manage the territory and to give some solutions to the problems of the fires. So we are also address the knowledge, more knowledge, better knowledge about oceans' interactions with climate and change, and the climate change in oceans, the perspectives of the science and the point of view of an astronaut about our living planet. We have a challenge in this planet because we need to understand that the universe is a big learning machine, and all the theories, the theories that normally fits this static view of the universe probably are not so correct. The universe are dynamic, and the machine learned theory probably answer everything. So thank you to join us, and thank you for our panelists, and thank you, Jean-Jacques, Merci bien.
Je vous remercie. Merci beaucoup.
Vamos agora iniciar o encerramento desta quarta sessão do Ciência 2021 com a assinatura de um acordo entre o Fundo Ambiental e o Minho Advanced Computing Center, MAC, da Fundação para a Ciência e Tecnologia, para o reforço das instalações do MAC no AFParque, no Minho, no âmbito da criação de uma comunidade de energias renováveis, em estreita articulação com o município de Guimarães, a Universidade do Minho e a Comissão de Coordenação e Desenvolvimento Regional do Norte. O objetivo é garantir a instalação do novo supercomputador a instalar em Portugal, no âmbito da rede europeia Euro-HPC, de uma forma ambientalmente sustentável, reduzindo os custos de operação para mais de 30% dos custos do atual supercomputador Bob, instalado em Ribadave, também no Minho. Para uma breve intervenção sobre este acordo e a instalação em Portugal do novo supercomputador, o Deucalion, passo a palavra a Rui Oliveira, investigador do INESCTEC e diretor científico do MAC.
Muito boa tarde a todos. É com grande satisfação que estou aqui hoje a apresentar um protocolo entre o Fundo Ambiental e o MAC, os parceiros do MAC. Portugal, a FCT, e mais especificamente o Minho Advanced Computing Center, MAC-C, irá alojar um dos mais potentes computadores europeus, o Deucalion. Mais do que a potência relativa, o que mais distingue o sistema é a sua arquitetura de vanguarda, única na Europa, e a atenção, que nunca é demasiada, à eficiência energética. No que respeita à tecnologia, o Deucalion combina a arquitetura tradicional da supercomputação, processadores x86 de última geração da AMD e os inovadores processadores ARM da Fujitsu, que equipam o computador mais potente do mundo, alojado no RIKEN, no Japão. Apesar de toda a sua eficiência, o consumo energético do sistema será elevado. É necessária energia tanto para os cálculos como para arrefecer o sistema. Em regime nominal, o Deucalion gastará o equivalente a 2.000 famílias, o que é muito. É, portanto, imperativo que o MAC-C, com um todo, minimize o desperdício. Para isso, deverá ser extraordinariamente eficiente e deverá reaproveitar a energia que inevitavelmente é dissipada. Mas não chega. É também imperativo minimizar os custos de operação e os custos ambientais. Estes são os objetivos do projeto de supercomputação sustentável, que hoje aqui trazemos, tangíveis para todos nós. Poupar dinheiro e não produzir dióxido de carbono. O projeto desenvolverá um sistema inovador de gestão integrada, acho que neste caso poderei dizer apropriadamente holística, da operação, garantindo o consumo apenas de energia verde e maximizando o autoconsumo. Esta gestão assentará na típica flexibilidade e previsibilidade da utilização de um supercomputador, em que a sua carga não é absolutamente crítica, e na gestão preditiva da malha de recursos energéticos disponíveis, rede elétrica, conversão e armazenamento local da energia, e ainda de sistemas de refrigeração passiva. Finalmente, o calor dissipado servirá para diretamente ser utilizado para a climatização do edifício e, assim, resulte da investigação que será levada a cabo, ser ainda de novo transformado em energia elétrica. O projeto de supercomputação sustentável é uma iniciativa do INESCTEC e do INEGI, inteiramente apoiado pelo Fundo de Apoio à Inovação e pelo Fundo de Eficiência Energética, e decorrerá nos próximos 24 meses. Doravante, sempre que seja claro de que MAC falamos, do Ministério do Ambiente e da Ação Climática ou do Minho Advanced Computing Center, não será necessário dizer MAC-C, mas diremos MAC. Muito obrigado.
Chamo agora os signatários do acordo entre o Fundo Ambiental e o Minho Advanced Computing Center, MAC, da FCT, Bruno Veloso, pelo Fundo de Apoio à Inovação, Nuno Lacasta, pelo Fundo de Eficiência Energética, José Manuel Mendonça, pelo INESCTEC, e Rui Sá, pelo Instituto de Ciência e Inovação, Engenharia Mecânica e Engenharia Industrial. Para encerrar esta quarta sessão plenária do Encontro Ciência 2021, chamo ao palco o Ministro do Ambiente e da Ação Climática, João Matos Fernandes.
Muito boa tarde a todas e a todos. Começo naturalmente por cumprimentar quem me convidou, meu amigo Manuel Heitor, numa casa e numa sala que tem cada vez mais amigos, pela parte que me toca. Também já são tantas as vezes que eu cá venho que é natural que isso vá acontecendo. Começando por referir o gosto muito grande em ter presenciado a assinatura deste acordo. O Rui Oliveira disse bem toda a gente, exceto de mim, vou eu dizer bem de mim, porque ele foi mesmo injusto em não ter referido o meu enorme empenhamento, mas sei que o fez por amizade e pela grande amizade que nos une, porque de facto eu esforcei-me mesmo. E esforcei-me mesmo porque valia mesmo a pena, porque este projeto é um projeto absolutamente essencial para aquilo que são muitas das coisas que Portugal quer fazer e quer fazê-lo como o Rui e o Inés, que sempre muito bem o quiseram desde o início, que foi sendo o mais sustentável possível. Sabemos bem aquilo que é e o que vai ser a intensidade de utilização de energia com a supercomputação e o aumento de projetos deste tipo, e era absolutamente essencial ter esta sensibilidade desde o primeiro dia que o Inesca teve. E, portanto, muito mérito ao Rui e à sua equipa por ter tido esta sensibilidade e ter desafiado o Ministério do Ambiente para aqui ser parceiro, e nós fomos com um gosto muito grande através deste duplo apoio que conseguimos somar com alguma imaginação e com um trabalho muito intenso de todas as partes para que aqui chegássemos. Na relação entre a ciência e aquilo que são as matérias da sustentabilidade, eu acho que esta frase é de facto felicíssima. A ciência que faz o amanhã e transforma a economia. Porque quando dizemos que a economia tem que crescer para poder gerar bem-estar para os 10 mil milhões de habitantes que vamos ter na Terra em 2050. E dizemos que ela tem que crescer, mas agora regenerando recursos e agora sendo capaz de ser neutra do ponto de vista das emissões, aquilo que verdadeiramente faz esta ponte, aquilo que verdadeiramente me permite dizer, já sem grandes hesitações, que ambiente e economia são, afinal, estão, afinal, na mesma face de uma só moeda e não são faces que se opõem, tem exatamente a ver com a ciência. Só a ciência permite que nós possamos afirmar que ambiente e economia são, afinal, absolutamente convergentes. E isso é demonstrado a escalas várias. À escala do território, que aqui também foi falada, e são os primeiros exemplos que vos trago, com a utilização de tecnologias espaciais, nomeadamente os satélites europeus de observação da Terra, que permitem que cada vez mais nós possamos ter um desenhar do território e um cartografar do território muito mais robusto, muito mais sofisticado e muito capaz de se atualizar a cada momento, maiormente em situações como a cartografia da perigosidade e risco de incêndio, como com projetos muito concretos em desenvolvimento, em que, no fundo, são vários os parceiros, mas, repito, a charneira está no saber, na ciência e na tecnologia, como seja a cartografia de modelação de risco de cheias, de riscos de incêndio, a cartografia de estrutura de vegetação e de quantificação até da biomassa que existe nos territórios, para, desta forma, sermos também muito mais efetivos na prevenção e no combate aos incêndios. Mas quando nós percebemos, para além destas matérias do território que são sempre essenciais, que muitas outras se lhe podem somar, o que sejam, por exemplo, todas as atividades de previsão e até de inspeção do próprio território, em domínios vários sob tutela do nosso Ministério, que vão das áreas protegidas às pedreiras, de onde todas as ciências, e nomeadamente as ciências ligadas ao espaço e aos satélites, têm um contributo da maior importância. Aquilo que eu queria essencialmente situar, sem vos maçar muito numa tarde que já vai comprida, tem a ver com o seguinte. Certamente que a ciência marcou a evolução da humanidade em matérias e momentos muito distintos, com aquilo que foi criando, com aquilo que foi descobrindo, com aquilo que foi interpretando a partir daquilo que já era o passado. Mas, da minha experiência, acho que nunca a ciência foi tão relevante no sentido de mostrar, quase que ao mesmo tempo e quase no mundo inteiro, aquilo que era o impacto que a nossa atividade humana tem nas alterações climáticas e na mudança das condições da Terra. Da minha experiência e daquilo que fui percebendo e daquilo que fui lendo, nunca a ciência foi tão importante a determinar a necessidade de uma mudança completa de modelo social e económico no planeta. E é mesmo isso o que resulta daquilo que foi a prova, como que eu considero inequívoca, sobre a nossa interferência naquilo que daquilo que são as alterações climáticas e o aquecimento do planeta. E aqui eu acho que a ciência se alcandurou a um patamar que não é o de resolver o problema A, B ou C, ou de ter uma invenção, uma descoberta que pode satisfazer aqueles que são, em primeiro lugar, um nicho de pessoas que depois se vão alargando no número e que se pode banalizar espaço fora. É mesmo a construção de uma verdade científica que, neste momento, pauta todas, ou se não pauta, deve pautar, todas as decisões que são tomadas, desde aquilo que são os grandes compromissos de Estado e entre Estados, veja-se o que é o Acordo de Paris, veja-se o que é a Lei do Clima, que amanhã terei a honra de assinar em Bruxelas à escala europeia, até ao comportamento de cada um de nós. Isto tem que ver com as matérias das emissões diretamente, naquilo que respeita, por exemplo, à energia, lato sensu, que inclui naturalmente a energia e os transportes. Isto chega àquilo que são os nossos comportamentos enquanto cidadãos e enquanto consumidores. E por isso há a grande revolução, a grande mudança, repito, à escala global, entendida por um número enorme de pessoas e num tempo muitíssimo reduzido, que obriga a uma mudança fundamental, é devido à ciência. É devido à ciência e isso tem, de facto, um significado que temos sempre que poder sublinhar. E eu acho que é essencial o papel que a ciência ganha aqui também, porque, em bom rigor, ela, sem ter essa intenção ab início, acaba por se aproximar muito dos decisores e, por essa via também, muito do comum das pessoas. É nesse sentido que era absolutamente inevitável, por exemplo, a propósito da Lei do Clima que já referi, que fosse mesmo contemplada a existência de um comitê científico absolutamente independente na Europa, que pudesse ele mesmo avalizar, estudar, acompanhar aquelas que são todas as decisões dos órgãos europeus, as que têm a ver diretamente com o clima e aquelas que nós sabemos que são até normalmente as que mais nos preocupam, que não têm a ver diretamente com o clima, com ela vão ter interferência e tudo isso tem que ter acompanhamento científico. Da mesma forma, a ciência e a tecnologia têm um papel absolutamente essencial naquilo que tem sido a transformação dos hábitos e dos hábitos de produção, maiormente naquilo que é o avançar para tecnologias mais limpas e que nos permitam já, por exemplo, que Portugal tenha reduzido em 26% das suas emissões e que venha a fazê-lo de forma muito mais intensa no futuro próximo, e futuro mesmo próximo significa 55% até 2030 e ser neutros em carbono em 2050. Claro que sim. Claro que a ciência não é bastante. Claro que há matérias em que tem que haver alterações de comportamento. Mas a ciência é absolutamente essencial a 2 níveis. Em primeiro lugar, no encontrar as técnicas e as formas e os processos de podermos fazer de forma diferente. E em segundo lugar, na sua banalização e no ganhar de escala que permita que, de facto, nós possamos ter soluções baratas que nos permitam encontrar os nossos objetivos. E, nesse sentido, cada vez mais, assim o entendo, a ciência tem invadido a vida dos setores, como é o caso do ambiente e da sustentabilidade, e tem invadido essa vida, fazendo a vida desses mesmos setores muito mais felizes. O que está a acontecer é, de facto, muito relevante numa dupla dimensão. Na dimensão da preocupação, daquilo com que nos confrontamos, é, de facto, uma dimensão enorme e de grande preocupação, mas aquilo que eu posso dizer, sem com isto me querer pôr em bicos de pés e reconhecendo que não param os problemas que surgem à nossa frente, é que é mesmo a descoberta de novas formas e novos processos que permite coisas tão simples como esta. No roteiro para a neutralidade carbónica dissemos que em 2030 teria que acabar a produção a carvão em Portugal para produzir eletricidade. O Sr. Primeiro-Ministro, num discurso de algum risco, quando tomou posse, disse que era em 2023. E olha, enganamos-nos todos. É mesmo este ano. E a Central Maior já fechou. Recordo, por exemplo, aquilo que foi, quando apresentamos o roteiro para a neutralidade carbónica, uma carta muito estruturada, muito densa, muito robusta da Galp, dizia, porque a nossa proposta, era que a refinaria de Sines, a refinaria de Lessa da Palmeira encerraria na década de 30, e a Galp, na altura, disse que nem pensar. Era inimaginável, não havia qualquer plano de eu poder encerrar até 2040. Pois olha, já fechou. Fechou há 3 meses atrás. Tudo aquilo que eram os nossos receios da insegurança que podia resultar do encerramento das grandes fontes de produção de eletricidade, estou a falar em quantidade, como é o caso de Sines, acabou por se esbater. Acabamos por encontrar outras formas. Acabamos por ter conhecimento suficiente aplicado na prática que estão a fazer com que, repito, no meio de uma dimensão de problema que é enorme, podermos avançar de forma tão segura, mesmo tão segura, para um planeta com muito menos emissões. E por isso a ciência tem aqui, de facto, esta responsabilidade grande, mas da qual, no caso concreto, certamente se pode gabar. Pode-se gabar daquilo que conseguiu e ter as peneiras certas, por ter conduzido todo uma organização que, no fundo, não existe, que é o compromisso entre todos os Estados do mundo para limitar o aquecimento do planeta, e pode, à escala mais concreta, quase que do dia-a-dia, porque as coisas são tão rápidas, saber que é ela mesma, a ciência, quem, acompanhada pela consciência que o conjunto dos cidadãos tem que ter, que vai mesmo encontrar as formas de nós podermos perceber que ambiente e economia são então, repito, são do mesmo lado na face dessa moeda, que são os investimentos da sustentabilidade, aqueles que vão fazer com que a economia cresça e tem que crescer de forma robusta, mas que cresça, repito, neutro em carbono, que cresça regenerando recursos e que cresça não desafiando nunca aquilo que são os limites dos sistemas terrestres. Também foi a ciência que nos disse quais são, e esses eu acho que já ninguém se atreve a discutir quais são, e temos mesmo que saber caber dentro deles. Por isso, muito obrigado, é sempre uma honra muito grande vir a estes encontros, agradeço muito ao Manuel Leitor o convite que me faz, e cá estejamos, cá voltarei para o ano. Obrigado.
Damos assim por encerrada esta sessão e chamamos a maior atenção para a continuação dos trabalhos do Encontro Ciência 2021 amanhã, pelas 9 horas. Agradecemos a vossa presença e participação no Ciência 2021. Até amanhã.